How do we put the information we've gathered this morning into the campaign? How do we use it? And I guess it sounded complex, devising pensions and social care, but really, if we think about it, that might be the easy part. The difficult part is convincing people to vote for independence and self-determination, and convincing particularly our generation to vote yes. Because you probably know, and I think it was mentioned this morning, that of the 55 to 65 year age group, 43% voted yes in 2014. And for the 65 plus, the figure was only 27%. So we come to the third core question that we posed for this conference. How do we persuade the majority of the 60-plus year old to support self-determination for Scotland? And going back to Ian Black's presentation about understanding what people are thinking, what will take the 60-plus to change their minds? Now, Robin hasn't arrived yet, but he's on his way. In his book, Robin McAlpine says, one way of addressing this, he says, we make staying in Britain sound risky and getting out sound exciting and positive. And George, in his presentation, demonstrated that staying in a post-Brexit Britain presents greater risks for young people, for the middle-aged, as well as for senior citizens. Now, like the Scottish Independence Convention held earlier this month, it's about building bridges from the independence movement to the communities, and for us, particularly to that 60-plus demographic. What can we do to make us more effective? What arguments can we make? What can we do better? And how can we make people change their minds, compel them, and have a convincing story? And Jason talked about the importance of storytelling, and I think stories and that lived experience may be more important than simply facts and figures. Now, to address these questions, we play host now to social activists in the independence movement. And we have Kate Campbell, Natalie Reid, and Robin McAlpine. And as with this morning, we're going to have the speakers, and they'll speak for 20 minutes about that time. There'll be opportunity to ask them questions, and then once everyone's presented, we'll have an open session. Can I say Christine Grahame, MSP, was originally invited to speak at this point, but I received an email on Thursday afternoon saying she had a bad cold and she couldn't make it. And I'm really delighted that Kate could step in at this last moment. Homelessness and housing is a big issue in Scotland as it is in the rest of the UK. The housing market, we know, is broken. And looking at Shelter Scotland, there were 34,100 homeless applications last year. 34,000 in Scotland. And we're not tackling the drivers of homelessness. So today, Kate will be presenting her views on the politics of homelessness in Edinburgh. So please welcome Kate Campbell. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's lovely to be here, so thank you very much for letting me step in. I think Part of the reason that I've come is my mum is one of the co-conveners of Pensioners for Indy, so I couldn't really say no when she asked me. But I think partly, maybe what I'm going to be talking about would have fit a bit better earlier in the earlier part of the programme, because I'm not so much a campaigner, I'm an SNP councillor. I was elected in May this year, and we're actually in administration in Edinburgh. So what the work that I'm doing is, we're in coalition with Labour, but we are in administration. So the work that I'm doing is from within the City Council, but looking at how we can address some of the problems. I have the role of Homelessness Champion, which is a title that I'm not very comfortable with, I have to say, but I do love the role and I love the work that I get to do. And part of this is that I get to chair a task force. The task force is looking to end rough sleeping in Edinburgh, but it's also to end the use of B&Bs for families as quickly as possible, and then for everyone else as soon as we can after that. We currently have, as far as we know, around 50 to 70 people rough sleeping in Edinburgh. That's shameful for a city this wealthy. Beyond that, we have around 700 households in temporary accommodation, and a whole lot more, especially young people who are sofa surfing or staying with family in overcrowded homes. Currently, if you become homeless in Edinburgh, you're likely to be in temporary accommodation for around 18 months. So it's not really very temporary. And for people with complex needs and addiction problems, there are a whole load of reasons why you might never make it through the system. People find themselves homeless for many different reasons. For quite a few people, it's relationship breakdown, but it's also things like if you come through the care system, there are a lot of barriers. Simple things like parental advice and support when you first get a home. If you don't know how to change a fuse or even where your fuse box is, or you don't know who to call if your boiler breaks or your tap is leaking, or you don't know what to do if you can't pay a bill, it can be really hard to maintain a tenancy without support, and for some people they feel like it's too much of a burden. So some people may choose to become homeless to escape, but it's not a positive choice they're making, it's out of desperation and a lack of support. For single people who become homeless, this often means 18 months in a bed and breakfast with no access to a kitchen, no access to a fridge or a washing machine. You'll have a shared bathroom, and you'll often have a curfew of 10 p.m. For many people, they just aren't able to stick this out. They might miss a curfew and be asked to leave, or they feel unsafe or vulnerable, or the rules around some of the accommodation can be too much for people and then they choose to leave, or for other people it might be a prison sentence or spending the weekend in the cells. But if you fall out of the system, you have to start again, so you have to go through the whole 18-month process again, just to try and get to a tenancy, and some people never make it. And even if you do make it to a tenancy, there can be a whole set of new problems. So maintaining a tenancy might be impossible, and you might choose to leave because of a lack of support. And if you're deemed to have made yourself intentionally homeless, then again, the council might consider that they don't have a duty to house you, and then you can be back on the streets. And there are reasons that people aren't able to access accommodation. Sometimes it's because they have no recourse to public funds. Sometimes it's because they're deemed to have no local connection. Sometimes it's because they have a dog. I met a man who was rough sleeping. He'd had his benefits cut, he'd lost his tenancy, he had no addiction problems, no alcohol problems. He was sitting with his dog on the street reading a book. The council will put people's dogs into kennels, but people worry about not getting their pets back. And we do have a few hostels that allow dogs, but they're limited. And if you can't get one of those, you have to make a really painful choice. And people do make the decision to stay on the streets so that they can stay with their pet. But a homeless person isn't always someone rough sleeping. I know 3 women who all had jobs who became homeless. It happens frequently because of relationship breakdown, domestic violence, or sometimes just a tenancy coming to an end. 2 of the women that I know are now counsellors. It can happen to anyone. As a counsellor, I've had quite a few young women with children come to me because their landlord is selling up. They have jobs, they have family support, there are no addiction problems, there's no antisocial behaviour, they haven't been evicted and they have been paying their rent, but the landlord wants to sell their home. And rents have gone up so much that often going back into the private rented sector just isn't an option for them. Sadly, we're now in the position where families are having to be housed in B&Bs, not for the whole 18 months, but for at least a few weeks at the beginning. And this is really difficult. Imagine having young children and not having access to a kitchen and having to share a bathroom with strangers. Even for older children, they're not nice places to be. The council does do checks before they put a family in a B&B, but they're still intimidating places, and for young people especially, this can be a traumatic experience. A family will then get a temporary flat, but it will be wherever in the city the next temporary flat comes up, so that they could be multiple bus rides to the children's school. They could be away from all of their friends and family and support networks and in an unfamiliar part of town. They could be there for a year or more before they get a permanent social tenancy, so they have to decide do they want to move the children's school and then possibly have to move again in another year. If they could afford to go back into the private sector, even having gone through the process of becoming homeless, a lot of people are afraid to take another tenancy where they might have to go through that process again in another year. So how did we get here? I'm going to start by blaming the right to buy. The Conservative policy perpetuated by Labour has led to a huge decrease in social homes for rent. The SNP have ended the right to buy in Scotland, but at the same time the Tories have been extending it to housing associations in England. It's terrifying. We've had a housing boom, and policies like the Help to Buy scheme, extended by the UK Chancellor last Wednesday, make it much worse. When you've got high house prices, you end up with higher mortgages, which means that private landlords charge higher rents. And at the same time, we've got stagnating wages. In Edinburgh, we have an economy where we have a lot of people who are in the low-wage economy, and we have quite a lot of people in the high-wage economy, but we don't have very many jobs in the middle, so it's very, very difficult for people to make it out of low wages. And if you live in Edinburgh, it's difficult, even if you have money, it's a difficult housing market to buy or rent in. But if you're in low wages or on benefits, then it's almost impossible. And we don't want Edinburgh to become a city only for the rich. Currently, we are seeing a reduction in presentations of homelessness, but because of a lack of move-on properties of social housing, people are spending longer in temporary accommodation. But with all the punitive changes to welfare from the UK government, and the universal credits which will be coming to Edinburgh next spring, I'm terrified that the amount of people who will be presenting as homeless will go up, and so we'll have an increase in problems. At the moment, we've got no capacity in the system because houses are so expensive. The council doesn't have enough houses to put people in, so when people present, we're having to put them in whatever the next available property is. So this means that someone might present with high support needs, but we put them into a property where there's no support. Or someone presents with low support needs, but the next available property has high support, so we're wasting resources on people that don't need it and not getting the resources to the people that do. Because we're paying a lot of money to landlords, and when we're asking for accommodation for homeless people, because if you say, oh, it's for a homeless person, then the landlord assumes there will be addiction problems, there'll be antisocial behaviour, there'll be mental health issues, and so there's an increased risk for them, which puts up the prices. But we're housing people that don't have any of those problems in these high-priced houses. And alongside the increase in the cost of accommodation, we're seeing a reduction in housing benefit from the UK government, which means that the council is having to pay more. The council is in a difficult financial position. It's not the worst of all the local authorities, but it is difficult, and it's having to subsidise the cost. So this means, because we've got a large overspend, it's really difficult to make the case for investment or increased expenditure in the support that we need. And council officers are desperate for investment because they work in homelessness and they do care. And they know the impact of not being able to offer a better service, and they're really pleased to have the task force to make the case for them. But essentially what we need to do is take all of the people who just need bricks and mortar and take them out of the system, put them in homes. And then we can free up resources for the people who really need the support, for people with multiple complex needs. And we'll be able to support them to get and then to maintain a tenancy. I visited the Access practice yesterday. It's a GP's practice for homeless people. And they told me that by the time they're in their 40s, homeless people are likely to have the kind of health problems that you would normally expect to see in people in their 80s. The Scottish Government have made a commitment to end rough sleeping, and as a local authority we have a huge role to play in that, and we're committed to it. So what are the solutions? We need more homes, and the council has committed, the SNP-led administration has committed to building 10,000 affordable homes in the next 5 years, 20,000 over the next 10 years. This is the most ambitious affordable house building programme in the UK, and it will help, but it takes time to build houses. But that's only one part of the problem. For the people who really need support, our system isn't working, and we need to be really innovative and bold and find new ways to help people that need it. So what's the role of the task force? Partly we need to increase capacity. So it's trying to get extra houses into the system. That's maybe speaking to private landlords, letting agents. We have a system called Private Sector Leasing, PSL, which is run by a housing association. If you put your property into PSL, you'd be told that you could do a contract for 3 to 5 years, and during that time you'd have a guaranteed rent every month. It would be a lower rent than you'd get in the private sector, but at the end of it your property would be given back to you in the condition that you gave it. So that is something that if any of you or you know anyone that has a property that you let out in the private rented sector, if you would consider that, because that's the properties that we could take families out of B&Bs and put them straight into a flat. So that's something that we need to try and increase. But we also need to look at prevention, so we need to look at benefit checks to make sure people are getting the money that they're entitled to. And we are going to try and mediate with landlords to keep people in their tenancies. That won't always work. We also have something called DHPs, which is direct housing payments. So I think we need to start looking at how we can keep people in a private rented sector tenancy by topping up their rent while we have them in the queue to get a social tenancy. I also think we need to look at complexity of need and get better at assessing it. So when people present as homeless, we're able to get them into the right kind of accommodation that they need straight away. Because there are some people who, when they come, they first of all, they'll go to a hostel, and then they'll go to a B&B, and then they'll go to a temporary flat, and then eventually, if they can stick out that whole route, they might get their own tenancy. And there's some people that just can't manage that. So there's an idea called housing first, and what you would do is when someone presents with complex needs, you just take them and you put them in a flat, and then you put all of the support that they would need around them. And that's something that has a really, really high success rate for people with complex needs, and it's something that we will be doing in Edinburgh. But I think one of the main things that the task force has to do is we have to build a political consensus around this. Although the SNP is the largest party in Edinburgh, we're in coalition, we're the lead member in the coalition, but we don't have a majority in the chamber, so we do need to build political consensus. It's not right that in an advanced, wealthy society we have so many people whose physical and mental health and their life chances are being destroyed because we haven't figured out the right ways to help them. And although many of the families finding themselves homeless now don't have complex needs, the experience of being homeless is traumatic. Especially for young people, it has lasting impacts on mental health and resilience, and hugely increases the likelihood of them growing up to have multiple complex needs. We have to build consensus across the spectrum so that we can take the radical steps that we need to end rough sleeping and make sure that everyone in Scotland is able to live in a warm, safe, affordable home, and that they have the support they need to stay there. The Scottish Government are tackling this head-on by ending the right to buy, by putting together the Homelessness Action Group to come up with solutions, working with local authorities, and by committing resources that will make a difference. But ultimately, we are still facing the consequences of decisions which are being made out with our control by a UK government which doesn't seem to care about people on low incomes or living in poverty. They are pushing ahead with welfare reforms and the rollout of universal credit that we know will have terrible consequences in Scotland. Last Wednesday, the Tories cut the Scottish Government budget by £199 million in 2018-19 and a further £320 million in 2019-20. We can't keep mitigating in the face of continued cuts. The only way to make sure that we get the kind of investment in services, the kind of welfare system that supports people, not punishes them, and the kind of economy that gives everyone a chance is to get independence. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Remind me, she mentions that homelessness can affect everyone. And listening, I remembered my wife and I, when we were both students, were threatened with eviction. And we went to a rental tribunal, and it was overturned. I don't know if those tribunals still exist, but that was in Yorkshire. Edinburgh, one of the richest cities in Scotland, and level of homelessness, it's a scar on our city. Any direct questions for Kate before I bring in the next speaker? Yes, sir. Just
question. What about private sector rent cap?
Oh, we've passed a motion to do that. So it wouldn't be a rent cap, it's called a rent pressure zone. The Scottish Government have put in legislation, so I think it's from early next year, local authorities can do that, and we have committed to doing it. We've committed to looking at it, but I think there's quite a lot of people who want to push ahead with that. The issue for that is that the legislation is that it will increase, I think, in line with inflation. I'm not, maybe it's CPI, but it will increase. Rents will increase by around 3% a year, which is better than what they've been increasing at the moment, but they will still be able to increase. I think it will help. The issue is that at the moment rents are too high in Edinburgh, so people can't afford them, and we can't push them down. We don't have the legislation to do that, and there are other problems. So one of the issues possibly with a rent pressure zone is that it stops the landlords increasing a rent, but it doesn't stop them putting a high rent at the start of a tenancy. So there's limits, but it's definitely something that I do think we need to look at.
The yellow top. Well, just other people probably can't hear you.
A very short question as well. You said in your presentation that Edinburgh City Council are building 10,000 affordable houses. Is that social housing or is it affordable housing?
It's a mixture.
What's the percentage of council?
Well, we haven't built them yet, and some of them, so we're building some of them are going to be built by RSLs, housing associations, registered social landlords. Some of them will be built by the private sector developers. When they build houses, they have to build 25% affordable. So that will be decided by the planning committee. I understand what you're saying because I agree with you. I think that we need social homes primarily. The problem is, and that's kind of my starting position, I think we should be building as much social as possible. The issue with that is that social homes take a lot more of a subsidy than mid-market rents. And we have, at the moment, you will not get a social home unless you're homeless. And so we have people who are on very low incomes who are having to rent in the private rented sector. And with mid-markets, you build more houses for less subsidy, and actually we need more affordable homes. Mid-markets are capped at local housing allowance rates, and they are secure tenancies, so people aren't getting evicted from mid-market rents. So we need a lot of social tenancies, but actually because we have so many people who need affordable homes, we also need mid-market rents as well.
In the middle there. Just keep your hand up and see you.
Nice presentation. A question that was raised perhaps a while ago, empty properties in the city that are not being used for any accommodation, is that type of building being accessed by your group to give people homes?
Well, the council they had a dedicated officer, they've now expanded it, so it's not dedicated officers, but it's part of a range of people's role to try and bring them back in. And they have managed to bring some back in. I think the issues are around, so when you have an empty home, you can put on council tax, but you can only claim it back when it's sold. So if you can't find the owner, then you can't really penalise them, although they will be penalised eventually when they sell, but you can't penalise them in the meantime. So there are things that people are doing to try and bring empty homes back, but there's also a limit in what we can do. But there's a team that have that as part of their role that are focusing on doing that. But it's really about finding the landlords and making contact with them, and that's not always easy to do.
Someone told me recently, and I wonder if you could tell me if this is true, that student housing is classed as social housing. So the councils are getting around their requirement to really provide housing, full-term tenancies, because they're building student housing, which is only used for a temporary time.
The council is not building student housing, but private developers are. The issue with student housing, and again, it's not something that I'm very comfortable with, but the issue with student housing is they don't have to provide 25% affordable when they build student housing. So it's not the council isn't building it, but private developers are getting around the affordable allocation with it. Mm-hmm.
I'll just shout that out. They don't pay council tax, so you have a spectacle of the city centre.
Mm-hmm.
There must be 10,000 new units in the last 3 or 4 years.
I mean,
All of which means council tax receipts are reduced by that many units.
mm-hmm.
Can't we apply council tax to it?
But what you're talking about there is applying council tax to students.
Yeah, it's fine with me.
Okay, I mean that's not strictly within the housing or the homelessness remit, but personally I don't think that we should be taxing students. You know, they have huge amounts of debt now. It's really hard for young people. If you want to get a degree, then you'll be taking debt just in order to live. So actually I think putting another tax on them wouldn't be. But I mean, I can understand there's issues in terms of a lot of student housing in the city centre and what that does to communities, but that's a separate issue, I think, from taxing students.
Can we...
Just on that, I was told that these units are being used in Edinburgh to gain extra monies during the fringe as fringe lets. So is the council getting revenue when they're used as fringe lets as opposed to student lets?
The council doesn't own them, so no, it would be the private developers.
But do you not get any revenue, any tax, anything from them, from the profits, additional profits they're making for renting them out during fringe?
I wouldn't have, it depends on how they're set up, and it would depend on what kind of tax they would be paying, because I would imagine, and I'm not an expert in this, but I would imagine that they would be paying business rates, but I don't know the rules around how many months they're doing it. But if they were paying tax, it's probably not coming to the council, it would probably be going to Westminster, I would have thought.
Okay, can I ask you just to save your questions when we have the full panel one, so we can get through the other speakers, and can we just show our appreciation to Kate? Thank you. Another reason why I'm delighted Kate stepped in to speak today is because she actually doubles the number of our youth speakers. We were keen to hear from youth in terms of their concerns and issues around independence. And in 2014, you probably know the 16 to 17-year-old age group, 71% of them voted yes. And the latest YouGov 217 poll reported that of the 16 to 24-year-olds, 54% would still vote yes. And that's the highest of any social group. And you might think, well, okay, this is a conference, Pensioners for Independence. It doesn't seem obvious that we should be concerned about youth issues. Yes, we're concerned about pensions and healthcare, but that doesn't mean to say we're not aware and we don't care about what's happening to youth. We know about the precarious employment market, zero-hour contracts. We know all about the dysfunctional housing market, and we know all about the low pay. And we learn that through our own children and grandchildren. So we know all about what's happening, and it's certainly an issue for us as it is for them. So our next speaker is Natalie Reid. I'm delighted she's come to represent the Scottish Socialist Party. She is the joint national spokesperson. She's a third sector worker, and Natalie became politically active during the independence referendum in 2014. Today she's presenting a paper, The Strategy for Independence, the Case for Building a Diverse Movement to inspire the working class majority. Please welcome Natalie Reid.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Excellent. Okay. So my name is Natalie Reid. I'm here from the Scottish Socialist Party. And I'd just like to thank Pensioners for Independence for inviting me here today to speak on behalf of the SSP. Because events like this are so important, it keeps life in the independence movement. If we as Yes supporters don't keep the discussion going, then it's left to the other side, to the establishment, to set their own agenda, a negative and patronising interpretation designed to break the spirit and energy that was the hallmark of the 2014 campaign. We need to keep talking about independence on our own terms and shape the narrative for ourselves. An important part of keeping the movement going is to make sure we take everyone with us. Scottish independence should be about making life better for all of us. Otherwise, what's the point? Groups such as Pensioners for Independence, WASPI, Women for Indy, who are also here today, ensure that voices from all walks of society are heard. So I'm very glad to be here today. The SSP has been fighting for an independent socialist Scotland since our inception in 1998. We've been there every step of the way, from our part in launching the Scottish Independence Convention over 10 years ago, to helping found the Radical Independence Campaign and Yes Scotland in 2012. We believe in independence, and we have never shied away from defending it in our literature, the platforms we speak on the streets and in the schemes of Scotland. Our members take as much ownership of the issue as any other Yes activist. We understand how important it is and think that it is crucial to assess our current position and reflect on the journey here before we can move forward with purpose. Respectful, critical debate should be welcomed. Thank you. In every movement. Sorry, I woke up with a really scratchy throat this morning. Thought I'd get away with it. The SSP supports independence because it's working people's path to a better life. Throughout my life, Scotland has been tied to a neoliberal Britain. We've seen consecutive governments since 1979 that have prioritised private sector growth at all costs. We've had ideologically driven attacks on the working class that have decimated living conditions, wages and industry. The public sector is in crisis because of underfunding and commercialisation. The influence of class organisations that used to fight for workers, like trade unions, is declining. We live in a neoliberal Scotland. The majority of young people are faced with slim pickings in the job market. A minimum wage, 0 hours contracts, working in exploited jobs such as hospitality, retail and call centres are the norm. We pay rip-off fares on public transport to get home and find massive bills for energy and council tax and rents that eat into around half of our income. The fastest growing group of Scots in poverty is those of us in work, and tenants in the private rented sector are those of us most likely to be in fuel poverty when you're forced to choose between heating and eating. Without industry, we've become commodities. If we're not used to work for the lowest wage possible, we're being sold things by multinationals at every turn. Look at this weekend, look at Black Friday. At the heart of this neoliberal crisis is the epidemic of poverty pay. Workers are not paid enough to sustain the spending required, and the state is left to subsidise these slave wages with top-up benefits. The people who are benefiting from this economic strategy are the shareholders of private business. These bosses have the parliamentary political classes eating out their hands, and we measure the success of the economy on the amount of growth in their pockets. But this economic growth does not factor in the contribution older people make to our society and world of work. Many people of my generation are only able to hold down a job because of the tens of hundreds of free hours of childcare provided by our parents and grandparents. Childcare costs are skyrocketing. They average at about £111 a week. It's pointless going back to work part-time if your wage is going almost entirely on childcare. According to a new report by Age Scotland, more than a third of Scottish grandparents over the age of 50 have provided regular childcare for their grandchildren. 2/3 of grandparents who provide care say it enables their child to work more, while 59% believe their children would have to give up a job or cut down on their hours without their help. The vast majority of grandparents who provide regular care do so at least once a week, with 15% looking after their grandchildren at least once a day. Almost 1 in 10 grandparents has given up work or reduce their hours to help with childcare. Scotland is also facing a population crisis. According to a report by the R.S. MacDonald Trust in May last year, between 2010 and 2035, the percentage of the population aged 75 and over is expected to increase by a staggering 82%, significantly higher than the equivalent figure for the rest of the UK. We cannot ignore the fact that we have a duty to care for older people in our society. We are already facing a social care crisis. Council cuts are starving the system of money, staff are overworked and underpaid, hospitals are forced to keep people in due to lack of care in the community. There is expected to be a shortfall of almost £700 million for social care between now and 2020 in Scotland. This problem needs to be acknowledged and tackled now. Health and social care is a devolved issue, so changes can be made, but without the full control over our economy that independence would give us, there's only so much we can do. So where is the independence movement currently? The word I hear most often to describe it now is stagnant. The Yes Scotland Advisory Board, which the SSP sat on, met after the 2014 referendum. We agreed that we would only push for another independence referendum when we had majority support, because another defeat would finish the issue for decades, like what happened in Quebec. But we must keep the case for independence and keep the issue simmering. We said independence is deferred, not defeated. So we were quite shocked when Nicola Sturgeon announced that they would be pushing for another referendum during Brexit. This was after being chased away from the issue by the Unionists during every election since the referendum. The SNP hasn't made the case for independence since 2014, and now it was focused on Scotland rejoining the EU. We have significant misgivings about this strategy. Making independence about the EU membership stops us making independence about progressive change to benefit working people. We voted Remain in 2016 because it was the lesser of two evils. We don't hold the EU, an undemocratic bosses club, in any sort of high regard, but we recognise that it was better than the xenophobic Brexit that was on offer. We currently live in the EU, and it's helped the government build the neoliberal Scotland I described earlier. I don't believe for a minute it's the silver bullet for independence movement. It will not inspire working class people. It's not an issue that brings meaningful change to their lives. What's more, the movement is considerably weaker, being so dominated by the SNP. They, of course, have a significant role to play, but the movement has to be more than one party. We have to acknowledge that a considerable section of the independence movement don't vote for the SNP at elections, and some this time round were attracted to Labour because of Jeremy Corbyn. As socialists, we welcome Jeremy Corbyn because he represents popular support for left-wing ideas, and this is encouraging. There are many areas we agree with Jeremy Corbyn and Richard Lennon on. In fact, Colin Fox, as myself, as spokespersons for the SSP, wrote an open letter to Leonard recently, congratulating him on his win. We also suggested areas of policy we hope to work with him on, such as a £10 an hour living wage, supporting no-cuts budgets at a national and local government level, providing free residential elderly care to add to Scotland's free personal care, and a massive programme of council house building. We wrote this letter because such a programme could transform the lives of working class people. These are issues we hope we can reach some agreement on. However, we disagree with Corbyn and Leonard on many other issues: independence, their vision of a British route to socialism, and the idea that the Labour Party is the vehicle that can bring about meaningful socialist change to our society. There is no British route to socialism. The mechanisms of the British state, the first past post voting system, the House of Lords, the powerful role of business leaders in governance, defended by one of the most stable ruling classes in the world, block any sort of radical change for us in this island. The Labour Party is wedded to the establishment in Britain. Its record in my lifetime is that of attacks on working people all over the world, from bailing out the bankers and doing nothing to change the system to the illegal Iraq War. Corbyn's honesty and integrity may have cut through the spin of Westminster politics to appeal to a new wave of Labour members, but the Labour Party is still dominated by Blairites. Corbyn struggles to put a shadow cabinet together as most of his MPs are actively organising against him. They force him to water down his politics. We wish Jeremy Corbyn the best of luck in the Labour Civil War, but we are not optimistic about his chances of making the changes he wants to see. The Scottish Labour Party has, in recent years, been one of the most right-wing parts of the party. It's the only part of Britain where Owen Smith beat Jeremy Corbyn in the leadership election. It is the party of privatisation of schools and hospitals in this city and across Scotland. And of course, they joined forces with the Conservative Party in the Better Together campaign. Richard Leonard's role in unionism in Scotland is a reflection that his leadership does not herald a new age of progressive politics. He was the political officer for the GMB Union when their executive backed Better Together, in a meeting which members cannot access the minutes for. Unfortunately, a lifetime in a timid and corrupted Labour organisation doesn't leave Leonard or the rest of Scottish Labour in a position to argue on behalf of working class people in this country. We choose something different. We choose a Scotland that's for the many and not the few, where no one is left behind, and that is the key to winning independence. Independence can only win over Scotland's working class majority if it stands unequivocally for a progressive change to make us economically, socially and politically better off. The Yes campaign in 2014 found strength in the social and democratic values that activists put at its heart. We tried to orientate the debate in our communities around anti-austerity politics. We want any argument for independence to make the case for a £10 an hour living wage, for rent controls and building council houses, for the democratic public ownership of key industry to be run as public services, and for massive investment in education and health and social care. We want independence to be for the benefit of all society, our young, our old, our families and workers and pensioners. Any future campaigning has to reflect that, otherwise what right do we have to ask people to vote with us? We need a leadership in the movement that is as collaborative and diverse as the movement that it represents. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on campaigning and strategies and what policies you think will be the most effective and far-reaching. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie. We'll just take a couple of questions from the floor, and then you can still ask questions when we do the panel session. So I'd like to ask the first question. Can you just wait for the mic? Otherwise the live stream won't pick it up.
It just makes it feel really important. I wanted to say, as a grandmother, thanks to Natalie for that nod of recognition, because I'm a bit tired of hearing how well I got a grant to go to uni, and then, you know, it's my fault that the world's in the state that it's in, and you know, I'm giving back in terms of quite a lot of hours of childcare. So thank you for that nod. And also, I also want to thank you. I mean, I'm an SNP member, but I want to thank you and your people in the referendum campaign, the run-up, the amount of work that you did in going into council houses, going into schemes to get the working class vote out. And I was... That's my son, who's technically now middle class, although we're all from working class background. Someone turned around to him in Glasgow and said, "It's the working class is going to win this for you, son." And if we don't have the working class with us, majority of the population, we're never going to win it. So I really value your contribution and your party's contribution. Thank you.
I think that was important enough for the mic.
That was a great contribution. Any more questions? Lady in the front here.
Regarding what you were saying about Jeremy Corbyn and how young people have been attracted to him, I have a concern that young Labour voters who came to us for independence in 2014 are going to be taken in by Jeremy Corbyn. And we're going to lose perhaps a significant number of young voters who will go back to Labour. And I think Richard Leonard, who is very much for Jeremy Corbyn, as I understand it, is also a danger signal for the independence movement. And I'm not sure how we can get that message through to young people, that Labour are very much, as you said, for the British state.
Do you want me to always answer that? Yeah, I think it's a difficult one. And as I said, you know, there's a lot of things about Corbyn and Leonard that we would support and, you know, wouldn't want to discourage them from, you know, using the position they have to make gains for the working class. But I think also the fact is that there is no British route to socialism, and I think that will become apparent quite quickly. And I think Corbyn had it was great to see that support for Corbyn, but sadly he is in a party that will probably be his downfall. And I think, although he'll try to push forward, he won't get very far, which is a bad thing, but in some ways it's a good thing, because I think people will see that and come back to the independence movement, because I think he can only take them so far. And I think in the end that will be the undoing. And even Richard Leonard himself and his position can only go so far as well. But at the end of the day, the British state can't bring socialism, it can't bring these meaningful changes, and I think the right people that we want to come back will see that and come back, and that will give us a good layer of activists that are politically engaged but also for the working class. So I think in the end they will come back to us, and the right ones will come back to us. I'm certainly hopeful of that.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Please show your appreciation to Natalie. Our third speaker is Robin McAlpine. Most of you know Robin is director of Common Weal, a Scottish think tank which campaigns for social and economic equality, participative democracy, justice, cooperation, peace, quality of life. He's worked for over 20 years in journalism, public affairs, political strategy, policy. He writes for a wide range of sources on Scottish politics. Now, writing in his book, Determination, Robin warned against the idea that an independent Scotland will be delivered by triggers, external events out with our control. By far the best opportunity is the 2021 Scottish election, he writes. Then I read on Common Space that in October 2016, Robin changed his position and said he wanted to transfer from team later to team sooner. Now, I don't follow football, and I don't think Robin does either, but I would say Robin transferring to my team sooner, is like Stuart Hogg joining Edinburgh Accies Rugby Club. So I'm glad he's changed his position, and today Robin will share with us Common Weal's research, the outcomes of the Scottish Independence Convention earlier this month, and his own political insights to provide ideas for how we can better prepare, how to engage within our communities, and critically, how to persuade those voters who voted no to be confident to vote yes in the next independence referendum. Please welcome Robin McAlpine.
I mean, honestly, it was a one-year defection. I said 2021, and now I'm saying 2020, so I wouldn't get too carried away. And it really was largely because of where we ended up. You know, we came out and we said there's going to be a fast referendum. Well, I'm afraid, deliver. You've got to do these things. But I'm not going to talk about what John said I was going to talk about at all. And I'm first of all going to apologise if I'm a bit vaguer and more confused than usual. I woke up feeling absolutely bollocks this morning, and I can only say that if the little biological weapons that pass themselves off as my children bring one more infection to my household before Christmas, I do not know if Santa Claus is coming. Anyway, what I'm going to mainly talk about here, in fact, what I'm going to only talk about is the research work. So you heard from Ian Black this morning on the focus group work, the public opinion research work that we've been doing through the SIC. And I will touch on some of the policy stuff, but Craig and George Kerevan, I think, will have covered some of this morning. I was working with Ian from the very beginning in this because we have not done what I would think somebody who wants to win something ought to do. So I come from a background of political campaigning, political strategy, and it's just an automatic response that when you lose, you work out why. And you don't work out why by guessing. And you don't work out why by all getting into a pub and saying, what do you think? Or, well, somebody in the street said to me. You've got to work out why. And the only way that you can work out why is to talk properly to people who didn't make it onto our side. Now, there's no point in fretting or worrying about, let me just, I think you'll all be familiar with the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 kind of how strongly do you feel about your vote on independence kind of scale. So 1s and 2s and 8s and 9s, well, there's no point talking about them. They're always going to be unionists and they're always going to be independent supporters. So there's not too much of a point about getting upset about that. During the referendum, someone said to me, oh, I'm so depressed. I've been going around all the big houses in Broughty Ferry and nobody's voting for us. Well, you know, I mean, don't get upset about it. You're going to get a lot of Celtic supporters around Ibrox. It's just what it is. And there's no point wishing that was different than it was. However, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is crucial. This is the people on either side of don't know who are inclining in one direction or the other at the moment, but none of whom, or few of whom, are really absolutely nailed home in the places that they're in both directions. So what we did was we ran a sequence of focus groups. Anyone who screwed up their face at focus groups, this is because you heard that Tony Blair used focus groups, that means they're evil. No, Tony Blair used focus groups to work out what his principles were. That's wrong. You're supposed to have your principles. The point of a focus group is to tell you, with my principles, how best can I communicate these to the people that I want to talk to. And it is important because there's two kinds of research. You've got qualitative research, where you can get in-depth thinking about what people are saying. You can tease into what they're talking about. And you've got qualitative research, quantitative research, which says, okay, these are our conclusions. Do they reflect the broad opinions of the whole public? So this is what we're doing, a series of qualitative and quantitative surveys. Now, this is early. And what we'll be aiming to do, effectively, is to try and work out how we build up a winning coalition. So this is not going to be won by taking a big shove and pushing the whole Scottish population in one go over a yes line. It will work by going bit by bit round all the peoples of Scotland and saying, how do we identify the ones that we can take, the ones that we can move? How do we get a percentage point here, a percentage point there? How do we stack those up? So we need to get, to win, we need to get from where we are just now, 5-6% of the no voters of the Scottish population. So we've got to work out who they are. So what we're doing is we did the first run, soft nose. Well, okay, what we did was in these groups, there was yes to yes, no to no, yes to no, no to yes, and undecideds. So all the movements across this side in the middle to try and identify what were the issues, what were the factors. Ian gave you most of that. I'm not going to cover that again. What we'll then do is we'll take out the learning that we found from this and put it to a quantitative poll. See, I told you I was vague. A quantitative poll, which will say, right, okay, what we are hearing that people are thinking is, but is this right? Is there a chance that we just managed to get 60-odd strange people who hold different views in our focus groups? And so we'll go to a big poll to find that out. But we'll also be trying to find out who can shift. So what we'll do is, this will be early next year, it'll be an extra big opinion poll. You won't see it, by the way. Just so you understand that the really important opinion polls you never see. The one that you see are PR stunts. So the way that this is, I think it's worth explaining this to people. The rules for the British Polling Association is if you reveal one piece of data from your poll, you must make public all your data. Now, if you're using a poll to actually inform you, you don't want to reveal all the data because then everybody suddenly sees it. So the ones that you see, the ones that you see in newspapers are either commissioned by people like newspapers or companies as PR stunts, or it's done by political parties when they already know the answer. So you don't put a public poll out until you already know the answer. The really important polls you don't see. These are the ones that are used internally to influence how you develop your case. So what we want to find out is who is possible to move. Who, if we ask them, what is the likelihood that you'll change your position, are getting into the higher half of the spectrum. Now, this is where I want to come in to the question of older people and pensioners. Because I think we're making a mistake, and I think the research backs this up, which is we are terrible for creating abstractions from people. We think too often about people as if they're a profile or a group or a tribe. And people are never just that. They are always individual people. And so, for example, one of the things which, when we come to older people, someone says older people, and someone says, pensions. Because older people get pensions, therefore it must be pensions. Now, what the research was saying this morning, and I hope that Ian brought this out, is that by far the most important thing in how people make decisions now, and incidentally, the thing about Corbyn, we need to be less worried about this than perhaps we are, because it's going to be a big hit in elections, but there's a big change, to my eyes, over the last 20 or 30 years in how people are making decisions. It used to be the standard theory was that people made decisions on the basis of what were called queues, not QUE, but CUE, as in the queue to come onto the stage. And the point of a queue was that people were, what they did was they generally followed informed opinions based on people that they respected and trusted in public life and what they told them. So, I'm a Labour man or I'm a Labour woman. The Labour leader says, therefore that's what I believe. Now that was the politics of the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. And it looks like Blair just killed that in the 90s. It looks like just the loss in trust in politics, not just Blair incidentally, the last days of the Tories, the major stuff. People seem to have lost trust. And we're not identifying anything like as closely with political parties as we used to. And this means that we're no longer quite as tribal in our thinking. It is perfectly easy. This is a problem for the SNP, but not necessarily for the independence movement. It's perfectly possible now that people might well go out and vote Corbyn in a Westminster election. This does not necessarily mean that they will follow that through and vote no in an independence referendum. So we've got to stop aggregating people into big chunks and this is my big urge to you all, this is how you, the group of you here, win the independence movement for all of us. You need to focus this down to the individual lived experience of people in your cohort. So not what are the theoretical issues which are specific to older people, but what are the actual issues that older people are feeling. So let me give you an example of a few that I think is an issue. Right now, for a lot of people, the pension, I believe, is often treated as a flat rate thing that just exists. It's an income stream that comes into your bank account or that you pick up in some other way on a regular basis. Now, you might moan about it, but what is the impact? What is the thing that's affecting your life? For a lot of people, I suspect rising prices in the shops, the cost of living, is the thing that they're aware of. They don't feel their pension shrinking, they feel the cost of living rising. And it's when they go to the shop and they can't afford something that they say, this country's not brilliant for me now, is it? This is not exactly how I want it to be. The housing issues come up. I'm not a specialist in housing and older people, but I suspect there's quite a lot of issues there where what they are feeling is the insecurity of the housing market. I know that every single time that you do a survey of older people, personal safety and security comes up as a high issue. Policing, my ability to walk the streets and feel confident and comfortable and safe. Now, if we are running around doing actuarial calculations on the ratio of young people to older people in, 2035 for the example. These are important things. But how many of you are sitting on a daily basis saying, God, 2035, the ratio of my generation to the generation that's coming behind is going to be out of kilter, and this is going to create macroeconomic problems for... This is not how people think. We don't think that far into the future. We think about our life as it is lived and experienced now. So, the first thing is you have to educate us. We're going to do some more of this work. So what we're going to do is, once we go through, first of all, the quantitative, dear God, the quantitative research, we are hopefully going to be able to identify at the end of that those among your age group cohort who are most likely to move. So we know that pensioners are, people over 65, people over 60, are the least likely to vote yes. And if we take that as a block, you might write them off and walk away, and that's how you lose. Because it is of my strong opinion that we have a much, much more possible fishing ground among lower income pensioners who are not exactly feeling that Britain is working out for them. So if we look at pensioners as a whole, we may write them off, and that's stupid. If we look at vulnerable pensioners, pensioners on lower incomes, pensioners who are coming from parts of Scotland that feel in decline, so Scotland's towns, Scotland's rural areas, in Scotland's rural areas, we're about to do a work with the Scottish Seniors Alliance, which this is with Commonweal, which we're calling the infrastructure of loneliness. How did we create a society that is making so many people, so many older people feel isolated and lonely? Is it how we're planning our public services? Is it the way that we're creating? Is it the availability of spaces that they go to? Is it a sense of safety in the streets? And this is something that's felt substantially by rural pensioners, a sense of isolation. So maybe it's transport. I mean, where I come from, transport's dying in the rural areas. If you're a pensioner who lives in a village, you better have a car or somebody who's able to drive you, or you're isolated. And that may be the big issue for them. So we have to find out what these are. Which brings me on to my next point. We've got to stop telling people stuff. This is our big mistake. We think once they're told, we're done. We've told you now. We told you that Britain was going to be bad for you. Why are you not listening? Being told isn't... I mean, let's be honest. I'm looking forward to being a pensioner. I can't wait till I get a point where folk are stopped telling me stuff anymore because I'm bloody out. I'm a rocking chair in my porch and my hallucinogens. I'm going out, Hunter S. Thompson. This idea that you can go about telling older generations how wrong they are about something, or how foolish, or how they made mistakes, or how it's their fault, as you were talking about earlier on, I think you're a generation that's probably earned the right not to be lectured in these things. And I don't think my instincts are from many older people that I know. I don't think that's how you respond best. But even if it wasn't, that's what everybody's saying. Nobody believes numbers that are thrown at them with that kind of, what I've started to call the dyslexia after it. So we've been doing this thing where we say, well, I'll meet your ONS and raise your IFS. And I'm going to take your OECD and I'm going to match that with the WTO. And blah, blah, blah. And blah, blah, blah. Now, one of the most interesting things that happened in all the focus groups, I think, was when one of the groups was infiltrated. And so I mean, this was done properly. This was done academically, as I'm sure Ian explained. So we got a professional company to profile everybody who applied to do this to make sure that we weren't having any actual, the 8s and 9s weren't there. But one RIC activist infiltrated one of the groups. And it was really interesting. I think Ian probably told you this. When he started firing numbers at everybody else in the group, they shrunk. They were all talking about, this was the Inverness group, they were all talking about the issues that mattered to them. They were talking about how they felt. There was an enormous amount of not sure I got my vote right because I was a soft no. And then it's, yeah, you didn't get your vote right because, blah, blah, blah. And they shrunk. And they pulled back and their body language became defensive and closed off and they stopped listening. Nobody needs to be told. We need to show, we need to listen. And the key thing about listening, a lot of people think listening is just walking about and saying, talk, right, Raji, No, it means we converse on the basis of what we hear. that we are talking to people. Now, this is really important. We have got to show people that independence can be better for them, not tell them. We need to find ways to demonstrate to people in ways that they can understand that it will make a difference. Now, for me, the number one point here, this is really important, I'm just going to pass over this and then move on, is everybody is saying, and I hope you can keep up with this again, that numbers aren't facts, numbers are contested. But for reasons that, I mean, I understand, they think they're trying to make decisions on the basis of facts, and they take a plan to be a fact. So, if you say, we're going to do X, then Y, then Z, that's a commitment. If they understand it, they can believe you're going to do that. If you say, we're going to do X, then Y, then Z, and the outcome is going to be utopia, that last leap is us telling again. But the planning bit, the plan bit, they will take solid. And they're looking for this. They want to believe, or those who might shift want to believe that this can be a better idea for them, that can be a better way to do things. I'm just going to say this, I say it to everything that I do, if we do not have a really good comprehensive prospectus for Scottish independence this time round, which people believe, we will lose. We will lose. Because people are no longer, it's not sufficient for them to say, it'll be fine, it'll be fine. How's that going with Brexit? What has been the experience of politicians telling you, it'll be fine, it'll be fine? We've got to stop, we've got to show, here is how we do it. That's what we've been trying to do with the White Paper Project. But we need to do this collectively as a movement. And we need to do it sector by sector, age group by age group. So we've got to have a plan for over 65s to say, here's how this independent Scotland is good for you. And that does have to have answers for pensions. And it does have to have answers which they can look at and say, I feel confident that if I vote, I'm going to be safe. And I even have a sense that this could work for me. Now, one of my favourite quotes, and I find this really quite moving, was it was a no voter who was still a no voter, who incidentally was feeling quite a lot of guilt. I'm not sure I made the right choice. I'm not sure I made the right choice, but was still a no voter. And she said in one of the focus groups, "How do we? I think I made the right choice. I think I made the right choice, but I did have this feeling in the back of my head. How do we evolve if we don't change?" And those were her words. How do we evolve if we don't change? We need to capture these concepts. What is evolution for the group that you're working with? What change creates the evolution for older people that they want to see? And how do we draw these links from there to independence? Now, I've used the example, and I'm going to be honest, that there's so much going on. It's just impossible for me to find time to sit down and do this everywhere. Let me give you an example of how a plan, of how a solid reality can be a message to people that this is something that will change their lives. So we can say lots of jobs coming to Scotland because of independence, and everyone goes, oh right, I see, because that's unusual, because the Tories and everybody else never ever say there's new jobs coming. Everybody says there's new jobs coming. I've heard it. So how do we show them? Well, we are going to have at least about 20,000 new civil servants that we will have to bring back from other parts of the UK to Scotland. So what I'm suggesting is, it was 6 months ago, the Scottish Government should be taking out full-page adverts in newspapers saying, if there's a yes vote, we will have to recruit 20,000 civil servants fast. They will be salaries between £22,000 and £45,000. If you would like to put your name down in a prospectus, get a prospectus and put your name down on a list for consideration for these jobs in the event of a yes vote, write in now, we will send you a prospectus. All over Scotland, particularly young people, but people of all ages and their families are going to sit around the dinner table with prospectuses telling them about these 20,000 jobs, which they can fill in an application to go on a list, and this is real. Suddenly independence is the difference between these jobs that they've put their name down for and not. And that's just one example. What is that for the pensioners? For your group, what is the thing that gets them actively bound into the concept of independence being better for them? How do we, 5 minutes, right, okay, right, got one more thing. I spotted nobody else got that. See, this is just discrimination, isn't it? They were in time, weren't they? They were in time, weren't they? Aye, that's the problem. Right, so this is what I think you as a group can help us with. Because you know this better than we do. Talk to people, find out what matters, how do we crystallise that in something which is a result of independence, how do we signpost and signal that to them in a way that buys them into the idea that this is real. That's what you can do. Because you are what I would call the vanguard, the core. I did think maybe there was going to be tens of thousands of you here because on the drive down, everybody was out in kilts, and I thought, God, this is really a very independency sort of a day. But no, you're the core. But, and this is the last point I'm going to have to make here, incidentally, there's absolutely hundreds from this research work which is relevant, but I can't cover it all. So the last thing is message carrier. You are the vanguard, the core. But we don't win this with the kind of message carrier that we used last time. So, nobody really likes politicians. I mean, it's not fair, it's not right exactly, but we've got to this strange, perverse point where if you look at people's reaction, I'm talking about, I'm not going to call them swing voters, I think that's insulting, non-weakly aligned voters. They've got their opinions, they've got their views, but they're not strongly aligned to one political party or another. So weakly aligned voters. They're not responding to authority figures telling them it'll be okay because they've been lying to them, or at very least, what they've been told in the past was going to be okay didn't turn out okay at all. So for how many years now have we been told that the solution to funding public services is economic growth? How many 40 years of economic growth? Is it all fixed? Do you believe that stuff anymore? I'm still talking to politicians that say, no, we really need the growth commission model. We really need to tell them that growth will make it. Shut up. Seriously, this is 40 years now you've been telling me growth was going to fix everything, and I'm still waiting. So this idea that a politician giving a cue is what makes people think things is wrong. Another point is, and I can only repeat this over and over, God, I'm going to have to get this in 2 minutes now, is that the boxing match model is not working. So we've got this idea in the independence movement, the way that you win is land a knockout blow right on the nose of Ruth Davidson. Right? So this is this idea. You're an audience of undecided voters. Here's me and Ruth Davidson on a stage. If I just can knock her out, you'll obviously recognise I'm right, she's wrong, and you'll convert. Right, okay, that's what we think's going on. That's not what the people out there are seeing. They're seeing the pariahs rolling about in the mud, poking each other in the eye, and they're walking away. They're not seeing knockout blows. This idea that we convert them in a fight with unionists is nuts. Not measurably correct. And the idea that they're all sitting about waiting for Nicola Sturgeon or Patrick Harvey or some other authority figure just to get them told, that's not right either. So, how are we going to do this? Okay, I recommend this book everywhere, and I've read lots of articles about it. I've not actually read the book, but it is, I'm going to recommend it anyway. Rules for Revolutionaries by Bond and Eckley is the story of how the Sanders campaign worked. And one of the big lessons about the Sanders campaign is that it was a diffuse peer-to-peer campaign. So what they did was they started with a core like you who really believed, and they expanded that core, not with other hardcore true believers, but with the softer believers, people who wanted something similar. And they went out and they recruited more soft people. Not because they're going to be out in the streets every night of the week in the rain putting leaflets through doors, because they're going to talk to their pals. You talk to your friends. And this is a very important way that we are gaining our sense of what we believe and what we change. Peer communication. Incidentally, this is one of the reasons why the older age group did become so negative towards independence, that we reinforce. If all our friends are voting no, this tends to influence us towards voting no. And if you get a chance to read Rules for Revolutionaries, there's things that it will explain, like, if you're being really clever, you don't just run about, sit at a street corner and shout at everybody. You go out into communities and you devise approaches which are talking to the people most likely to influence. So, for example, Perhaps in a care home, there is one old guy, old woman, they're charismatic, they're liked, they're popular. People like them, they listen to them, they talk to them every day. If we can make that person use the language of independence, it beats have a 2 minute, I'm off, beats having a 2 minute or a 1 minute exchange with 1,000 people, with a whole block, because they are passing these messages on. And we need to understand that this is won or lost in our ability to create stories about their life. Right, so a story is think of everything in terms of stories. A story is a thing which starts you here and takes you there in a way you can understand. So just think about everything as a story. Your whole life is a story. Each thing you do is a story. You start somewhere, you end somewhere, and you make sense of it. One of the things that really came out of these focus groups is unionist stories were being recited back to us again and again and again from everybody. Yes, no one decided. So now's not the time, obsessed with independence, stick to the day job, blah, blah, blah. The number of pro-independence stories which emerged after 2014 that were being repeated back amounted to 0. We are a movement with no stories. And this is apart from a long rambling talk about the European Union. This is not good. So what are the stories that can be put in the mouths of your friends who may do no more than mention it briefly over coffee, tea, I suppose, I'm not talking at millennials, over a cup of tea, with your friends? This is what wins independence, is creating networks of communication. And I'll finish by giving you an idea of a story. It's not just you, it's who moves you. You know these things. So for me, I believe that we can get a lot of ground by getting grandchildren to talk to grandparents. So let me give you a story that we don't use, that isn't there, but we can use, and then think about what the others are. So a grandchild says to her grandmother, gendering everything, she says, "Granny, I'm so proud of you. I really am. Your generation did amazing things. Those after-war years, those years when you built an NHS and council house and nationalised industry and built a welfare state and a pension system, it created a country which excites me, which I'm proud of. And I'm proud of you for being the generation that did that. But I don't live in that country anymore, Gran. I don't. That's not the country I was born into. And all I want is for you to help me give my generation the chance to do the same thing, to build a new country and a better country. Because what I want to do, Gran, is to try and make you as proud of me as I am of you for this chance to build a country that you can be proud of too. So this idea, enable my generation to do what your generation did, so that my grandchildren can have this conversation with me one day. This is a story. What are the others? Who are the best people to carry them? Who do we speak to? And what tone do we speak? This is your world. This is your peers. These are your people. You need to work this out. You need to create the stories. You need to find ways to spread them. You need to get peer groups who are active and talking in their lives to others about messages and things which relate to the experience of their life as lived, which makes them feel both confident, optimistic and enthusiastic about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, Britain isn't as good as it gets. Thanks. Sorry,
Just stay there. Lovely. So we'll just a couple of questions, and then we'll have the panel question session. And then after we've done the panel session, we go on to the final section, looking at the future for pensioners for independence in terms of strategy. And we're also going then to do the raffle draw, just to keep you in the room. So, question to Robin. Can you just wait for the mic? Alan, lady at the back there.
Robin, I wanted to ask you, as far as I've understood it, You were saying about your research trying to identify people who are most likely to move, or, the people in the middle who could move either way. And that kind of sent a shudder down my spine in the sense of the experience of, as an SNP supporter in the last few campaigns, the election campaigns since the referendum, going around and knocking on people's doors and asking them how they were going to vote. And once you'd got that answer, that seemed to be, for some canvassers, for some other activists, the whole purpose of the expedition. And that just felt very uncomfortable and clinical to me. So maybe I'm confusing two things here, but I want to be clear about what you're saying about your research kind of finding or targeting people who might move. And I would like you to reassure me that it's not along the same SNP model of getting the information and then moving on.
Yeah, the whole point is that that's in so many ways the wrong thing to do. So when I say qualitative, what's wrong with me? When I say quantitative research, I mean properly carried out scientific quantitative research, polling. We do a poll of 2,000 people. Right, what's the best way to get let me think of an example. What's the best way to get accurate gynecological information from women? Would you send a big hairy truck driver to knock their door and ask them gynecological questions? I suspect that you do not from that get the most accurate answer. So why do we imagine that Nottingham Hussies are the very people who are least political, least party aligned, rapping the door, chucking a party logo in their face and saying, I'm from a party, what do you think? Why would we imagine that's the best way to elicit information from them? So what I'm saying is, don't do it. Stop it. When you get very close to an election, you need to have data to enable you to do turnout. So if you're right close to a poll, you've got to know which door to rap to get folk out to go to the polls. But no, it's not happening next month. What's the point in gathering all this information 2 years before a vote? Unless we screw this up, half of them have changed their mind. So you don't do it. It was a mistake. It's not what we should be doing. Let me rapidly give you a very quick Rapidly give you a very quick example of the Obama campaign. Knock the door. I spoke to an Obama activist at some length about this. Knock the door. Hi, I'm from the Obama campaign. Are there any issues that you've got a question about? This is a conversation. It's from a semi-script, so you make it up yourself, but you know what you're supposed to be saying. And they say, well, I was thinking about schools. Right, well, any questions? Yeah, but what about... Right, so what they would do then is they go straight back. They'd stop. And they go straight back to the HQ, and they would send that person a leaflet to answer that question. Through their door, personally. And it would be targeted. So, this was a mother in her 30s who asked me a question about schools. So they go back and they've got a special leaflet about mothers with children, which relates to this question. It went back. Within a week, the same person went back to the same door. Did you get that leaflet? Did that help you out? Oh, yes, son, that was really useful, thanks. Any other questions? See, now you mention it, transport. So, they said, thank you very much. They go back and they would give them a targeted leaflet with the information about Obama's position on transport. They would keep doing this till the person says, no, that's all the question. They would stop, they would leave. They wouldn't ask them to vote for Obama. They would leave, they would go away. And then within a week, everybody contacted would get a personalised, inverted commas. It was done by students in giant factories. But a personalised, handwritten letter which said, thank you so much, I loved talking to you. If you've got any more questions, you know my name, you know where I am, give me a shout. That's all they did. They never once asked them to vote for Obama, and they never once asked them what they were voting. That is how to move people. If you get to an election, you've got to gather it. So stop putting badges on. Stop rapping folks' doors. Stop demanding things from them. Stop telling them things. That's what we need to do in this phase. And ideally, you're be much better recruiting 10 people to have a chat about it with their pals in the cafe than rapping 30 doors.
All right, why don't we start the panel session? And just before we do that, let's give Robin applause for his presentation. Thank you. So the questions can come to any members of the panel, and we'll take first question. The lady down here.
You just want to get to the raffle, eh?
Well, I mean, the key thing you're saying there about a movement without stories, Robin, is amazing, isn't it?
A movement without stories.
What you've just described in terms of knocking on doors would be a great opportunity to create those stories. And I'm looking at Alan Campbell over there. I know he's a historian. It goes back, I think, to some of the techniques of oral history. We need a lot more one-to-one talk about experiences around the referendum or whatever. Maybe not so, could be about the labour movement, but just their experiences in the community and the lessons we've learnt from oral history. Much more powerful than reading about it in a book.
Can I just give an example of this for people, which is, how many of you are familiar that there was once a boy who rather overplayed the risk of wolves? Okay, he overplayed the risk of wolves. Now my kids know this. Their kids will know it. Kids above me know it. If we had turned this into an aphorism, overselling yourself is likely to result in a collapse in trust. And my kids wouldn't remember that. But a boy crying wolf, that's a story. It lodges, it sticks, you remember it. Mythology is often more accurate than history, inverted commas, because mythology is drilled down to the meaning, the content, the message, the idea, the story. And I'm afraid that if you were to look at a lot of the history of, say, the English Civil War, the boy that cried wolf is more accurate. It tells you more. Stories are good. We live by stories. And if you've doubting how bad we are at it, away home and gear yourself a story about rejoining the EU. Just think about the moment when you say the end, and you think, oh, for God. You know, that it's not a story. It's not a tale. Nobody gives a monkeys. Now, it doesn't mean the EU couldn't be a story. We've just not done it.
I just, you know, while you're talking there, you're talking a story and how it influences people and also influences, you know, ideologically. And the story I've heard, and I've told it to my kids, and I got it from my father. My grandfather was lost at sea. He was a fisherman. And my father, as a young man, went with his mother to the owner of the trawlers. This was in Hull. And the ship was lost, the trawler. And he knocked on the front door. And said, have you heard anything about the trawler, any news? I said, no, nothing at all. And he finished the conversation after about 2 minutes. And then the owner's wife said, next time you come, can you knock on the side door and never come to the front door of the house again? That's the story my father told me. And in terms of politics, and I could tell a lot more, but stories are powerful. And that's my story, one of the early stories my father told me about politics. Anyway, let's open the questions to the panel. Lady in the front there.
In 1985, I was living in the unincorporated area of West Hollywood, California. We were campaigning to become an independent city, which is a little different to becoming an independent country. But when we had our election, there were two parts to it. A, should we become an independent city? And B, who do you want to be your mayor and your council people? And sometimes I think that that was one of the things that was lacking in 2014, because that vote for independence didn't answer, there was no plan, it didn't answer the questions. So do you think it would be more practical to, in the next referendum, to make it a more specific, do you want independence and who do you want to run the country?
No, for a very specific reason. Now, there's a midway between what you said and the question. So the problem is that one of the effective hits that I thought the opposition should have used more was after independence, it's all the same politicians. So we have this, we tend to want things according to how we feel about them when we close our eyes. This is just a universal thing in marketing. Nobody actually sells you a car or a new hairdo or hair care product, whatever, on the basis that it's actually better. Really, nobody goes and checks out horsepower or whatever. you close your eyes and you imagine what it will be like to have that car to look like that with that hair. And that's how humans make choices. Now, what do we want them to see when we close our eyes? Remember, this is a group who are weakly aligned to politics and politicians. So do we want to make them see Scottish independence in terms of the same cohort of people running things? And that's the problem of saying, who do you want? I mean, genuinely, there's a big part of me that's desperately hoping that a new generation of politicians come through because of the referendum, and that we don't just end up with a Scotland that looks exactly like the one now, but without the Westminster element. However, there is something that we do need to do, which is this idea of prospectus. So we need to say to people, one of the things that we did wrong the last time was, I mean, with the best will in the world, even I couldn't quite close my eyes and imagine what it looked like for the 18 months, 2 years after a yes vote. Nobody bothered to really explain it. The white paper had a bunch of bits and pieces, some of which were commitments, some are guesswork, but never really understood how it was going to happen. So it felt like I was okay with that. But, I mean, I'm a bit more of a risk taker with these things. When people close their eyes, they need to imagine what the next 3 years is going to be like. You've got to imagine how we build it, what we do, but not in detail. People don't want the full detail. They want just like they don't want to know the horsepower and they don't want to know the chlorine content of the hair product or whatever the hell it is. They want to feel it. We've got to create the tale of building a new Scotland in a way that they can feel and trust. And that's what I think we need to get into the story of the referendum, is this is the Scotland. And I do not mean by that all the detailed policies afterwards. We can do some of that as well. Each party, and I don't mean political party, each grouping that comes in, from One for Independence to the political parties to Commonweal and so on, we can all put our vision of what this can enable, but we need to make people understand the process by which this caterpillar turns into a butterfly. The tale of the butterfly is still to be written, but the tale of the metamorphosis matters and is important. And that's the thing which we've got to do a lot better. And I think a number of you will hear me say this before. This is partly so we can stop talking about it. So you understand what I mean by that. You go into telly studios and someone says to me, what's your plan for starting a currency? And you do what we do, which is a long rambling thing about how many other countries have started a currency and how it's quite normal and how we'll manage it somehow. That's a shit answer. Which means the next time you go into a TV studio, you're going to get asked that again. Because you gave a shit answer the last time, so it'll just keep skewering you. If you go into a television studio and they say, how are you going to start a currency? And you say, well, what we're going to do is, and in 3 or 4 sentences, you give a very, very concise, believable, understandable outline of how you're going to implement a new currency, you're never going to hear that question again. Giving independence supporters time to absolutely nail questions on TV is not good TV. So they'll ask you about something else. So the better our answers, the less we have to talk about them, the more we can talk about what we have to do. The weaker our answers, the more we're going to be talking about weak answers, and the less we're going to be talking about something else. So for a whole range of reasons, the question isn't so much who do you want to run it afterwards, but let me help you to understand what happens if you vote yes and where it takes us to, and then we'll have a chance for you to choose the story of the butterfly that we're going to create. And that's how I think we've got to do it. We're still at the early stages of the research, but it's certainly strongly suggesting that.
Well, we won our campaign, by the way.
Oh, that's encouraging. Who did they choose to become the politician? Was that person popular?
Yes.
Right. Well, see, this is the thing. If anyone's got a suggestion of a really popular, really potentially brilliant leader for Scotland that we can tie up to this, that we all agree with, and we all get around and stick with, email me, and maybe we could do that. But that's the key. You would need that if you wanted to go for the inspirational leader model of doing this, I think. Anyone else want to?
The gentleman over there.
Oh,
you just doing. Okay.
So just from, I understand the logic behind that. So because we don't want independence to be the end goal, it's a means to an end. So it gets people thinking about sort of Scotland after independence, asking that follow-on question. But I think from a strategic point of view, I think we would lose the narrative of that quite quickly, because if we had to go on a campaign where, we said we want independence but don't vote for our independence colleagues because X, Y and Z, the media would pick up on that instead of the unity of the movement. And I think we need, next time we go for Indy, as I said before, I think the leadership needs to be diverse and show that diversity, but there also needs to be a unity there. And I think if we did that second question, that might pick apart the unity. The other side would pick apart of the unity and focus on that, and we would lose the narrative, a positive narrative that we need.
I would say as well, I mean, I agree with what's been said already, but I think there's also, people don't really like politicians, so if you're tying that vote when you go to the polling station, and I think for a lot of us here it was something really special and probably a moment we won't forget, but if you're having to go in and vote for a politician at the same time, it kind of taints that, so I think absolutely no.
Not crazy.
I'm a little curious because we talk now and we're all absolutely adamant we want to have independence. That's fine. Okay, I understand that. But we ignore clearly the huge element in the room, which, in fairness to Robin, he sort of addressed it. And Natalie, I know you'd probably be sympathetic with it. And Kate, you probably would not totally disagree with. The fact is, neoliberalism and the way our society exists is consumerist. Yesterday we had that ridiculous Black Friday event. £5.8 billion is getting spent on advertising for Christmas. What are we doing? Do we want independence nevertheless? And Robin, you'd say you don't need to know who's going to represent us. I don't want to know who's going to represent us because they're all tied to a capitalist, neoliberalist, Hayekian model, which really is outdated and has been proven to be outdated. Perhaps the panel would like to comment on that.
I'm so excited that you asked that question because I actually wrote down a quote from James Connolly that I was hoping I'd be able to use, so I'm going to read it now. And this is obviously about the Ireland and the Easter Rising, but we can think about it now. If you remove the English army tomorrow and hoist the green flag over Dublin Castle, unless you set about the organisation of the Socialist Republic, your efforts will be in vain. England would still rule you. She would rule you through her capitalists, through her landlords, through her financiers, through the whole array of commercial and individualist institutions she has planted in this country and watered down with the tears of our mothers and the blood of our martyrs. I'm so glad I got to say that. I wrote it down. I was like, maybe I'll get the chance to say it. Yeah, independence, as I alluded to before, it can't be the end goal. It has to be a tool that we use to bring about change, to smash neoliberalism. And of course, I would want us to bring about socialism. But it can't just be... It can't be the end goal. It has to mean something, and that's why we have to aim at the working class and those values, because just switching flags is not enough. And as Robin says, it's not a good story. It's not a good story, switching flags. And it needs to be about meaningful change to people's lives and to the society that we live in. I think that's absolutely true. And thank you for letting me use my quote.
Can I jump in? I was going to say, I'd like to make it clear I'm on the left of the SNP. But actually... For me, I wasn't interested in being in politics until independence. I was interested in politics, until the independence referendum. But I felt frustrated by politics, so I would read the newspapers, but I didn't have anything to do with politics in my day-to-day life. I wasn't in a political party. And the independence referendum changed that for me, because I felt for the first time, actually all of these things that I thought were unchangeable, Westminster was unchangeable, we could never break that system, it was so fixed. Independence gave us an opportunity to do that with a new parliament, with a parliament that we could form ourselves and that we could reshape our society through that. So, I think, yes, the independence movement is not about the day after independence, it's about the opportunity and what we can do with our society. And obviously you can hear from my accent, I grew up in London, I have family in London. For me it's a really positive thing. If we can do better in Scotland, then maybe people in England can look and think that there's an alternative for them as well.
And can I just very briefly explain? Okay, so I have had two careers. simultaneously, I was a lefty, but I've also been a professional political strategist. There's a lot of crossover, but they're not identical. And when I come to talk to an audience about you, first of all, I was asked to come and talk about strategy, and second of all, I don't assume you're all lefties. So I leave that wee bit aside to persuade you that we've got a bit of a plan which doesn't involve you all converting to Marxism or something like this. But let me tell you where the big crossover comes, and this is super important. So let's be clear about this. The number of people that we are going to win over by saying Hayekian is small, okay? So what we've got to do is make it a story. Now, this is what's really interesting here, because for the first time in my life, we now have a majority of people who've got serious, serious doubts about capitalism. Now, not all capitalism, the capitalism we've got. And these, for me, are the stories. So I don't want to be any part of something, because there's two things about which people are angry. They're basically angry about capitalism and elite domination and control. So, I mean, just to say, for example, see all these student flats. Don't think of them as housing. They're an invasion. It's a way of, it's an invasion. Developers are trying to capture all available land because land is an immovable, imperishable asset which is always useful. The problem is, first of all, they chucked up pointless, what they had to do was somehow kind of finance the invasion of the land. So first of all, they chucked up business buildings, and then there was too many of them. So then they chucked up build to buy, but that market gets saturated. And they literally looked around and says, who's gullible enough still to be giving us money to invade their land? Students! They are evil. They are wrong in every possible conceivable way. These are student flats until that market falls out. And that land is going to be still owned by the same people, and it ain't going to be for students, and there's nothing social about it. And this is why you don't have houses. Because all the land was invaded by people whose only aim was to screw you. Now, people know this now. People feel this. The point is, you've got to tell the story. And you've got to tell the story in a way that doesn't allow them to flip it over. The story that the kind of other side are telling you is, it's those bloody immigrants. They're the ones that took all your... We've got to get it away from that story and into this story. And it's everything. So let me give you an example. But the problem is we're bad at it. Because we say Hayeki, best name well in the world. But let me give you an example that I took from the last referendum. And again, you've got to make this real. So we're coming up for Christmas. This is when I was talking about it. I said, stop saying fourth most unequal country in the world, because I don't even, I'm a public policy, but I don't even know what that means. How shit is that for me? I mean, how much better would it be if I was sixth most unequal country in the world? It's just numbers. It doesn't mean anything. But you can visualise it. So what I'd suggested was, if you take the spread of income in Denmark and the spread of income in Scotland, not the level, the spread, what you find is the average person in the middle, just because the meaning of inequality, is much better off in a flat spread than an unflat spread. And you can calculate this. You can see, if we had the income spread in Scotland that they have in Denmark, the average person would be this much better off. So what my suggestion was, let's get Elaine C. It was, like I say, it was the run up to Christmas. Let's get Elaine C. Smith in George Square in panto outfit, pile of presents this high, and our pile of presents this high, a bit lower, and you see, this is the presents that a Danish parent can buy their children. This is the presents that a British parent can buy their children. That's how much of your Christmas British capitalism, I wouldn't have said capitalism, stole from you. British capitalism, the Grinch that stole 30% of your children's Christmas. This is a visualised story of the thing that you're talking about. We can do this in tax evasion. We can do this in housing. We can do this in economic inequality. We can do this in absolute bucket load spades, because the big issue, if you boil this down, the experience for a lot of people is what they feel is insecurity. What it's doing to them primarily, the experience of neoliberal capitalism is an experience of insecurity. Not knowing if it'll be okay next week and the week after, not knowing if public services will stack up, not knowing if you're going to get out of 0 hours contracts, short-term contracts, etc., not knowing if your pension's going to be safe. You ask me, the single biggest sell for Scottish independence is we can bring your sense of security back. Not by bombing bloody Syria, but by creating an economy where you know what your salary is going to be next year, when you know that there's a fighting chance that when the time comes you can buy a house, that when it comes time to retire, that you're going to have a pension which isn't going to be penury. Now that, for me, if we can wrap it up, is the big promise of Scottish independence, is a life where you're not living in perpetual fear, a life where things, so for example, a big one for me is food, a life where things taste better, because you're not getting cheap processed shit fired in from Poland, because we can create an economy where we use our incredible domestic produce to create food. So a Scotland that tastes better, a Scotland that looks better, because we're no longer just ramming up whatever bloody corporate building that they can put up fast. A Scotland that feels better, because once again we've built community back into our public infrastructure so old people have places to go and meet and talk. These are the stories that we've got to tell. We're just going to never see neoliberalism or Hayekian or rentier capitalism and all the phrases. They're right, they're absolutely nail home right, they're just not good stories. Now, obviously, I mean, it's funny, I spend all my time trying not to be too lefty, to try and persuade people that the strategy stacks up either way. But this is, I am absolutely sure this is how we sell Scotland. We don't sell Scotland with flags and the independent supporters who think it's all about pride in William Wallace. It's not that. It's giving people the life they hope for. And the life that people hope for is time with family, economic security. It's not 3 holidays a year, it's economic security. It's a decent place to live, and one which I'm always amazed that people don't understand how high this is, space to play with my family. A park I trust I can go to that's clean, where I can meet other people and I feel part of my community. Again and again and again, this is what people tell you they want from their economy if you ask them. It's not Black fucking Friday. I hate Black Friday so fucking much. The only thing I can say, at least they actually nearly called it Evil Friday. I mean, I'm surprised. Evil, despicable, dirty, crappy Friday. That's what they called it, and I kind of agree with that. That's not what they want.
Thanks, Robin.
Did I get carried away there, John? Was that me getting...
That's you getting
sorry.
stories. That's great. We've come to the raffle, but I see your hand going up there. Go for it. Use the mic.
Another quick question is, for me, a very important part of independence would be for Scotland to become a republic. And I wonder if the panel members... I wonder if the panel members would want to comment on how we might achieve that glorious future. Thank you.
So the SSP, our phrase is always an independent socialist Scotland, a modern democratic republic. That's what we stand for. How we go about it, dare I say another referendum, but it has to show the will of the people want that. And again, I suppose we have to show, is that the right word, Robin? Show them why it's better for them. I mean, if you look, I feel bad now saying figures, but if you look, last year, how much was it? 350 million that they spent redoing Buckingham Palace and things like that. I think it's an easy sell, I think, for many. The benefits do not equate to what they do, and I think it would have to be a democratic process, but it would be one that we would be eager to get in place quite quickly after. It's definitely a hot topic for us.
I'm a Republican, but I think ultimately that an independent Scotland would end up as a republic, but I would worry about tying it into the independence referendum, because I think there's a lot of people who you're adding another barrier, another thing they have to overcome to make this, especially the people in the middle who might be kind of going either way. So I think it's inevitable. Once we get independence, I think it will follow on, but it's not a campaign I want to have now.
Okay.
And no, I think magic blood. You know, magic blood, whereby your blood is magical and it's been granted to you by God, and that magical blood means that you should have a veto over public legislation. How could you not be in favour of magical blood? I mean, dear God, are you not any, what do you call it, Rowling? I mean, no, of course it's a stupid idea. And the other thing is that we quite like Lizzie, but Charlie's an idiot, and he'll do it for us. What I would say is, I'm being quite cynical and quite hard-eyed about this. Most Republicans vote yes. In fact, I think we should start a campaign which says Republicans don't vote no. You know, just for the small number that still do. So I don't think we need to worry in the sense of gaining Republicans. I'm kind of a third of the way through writing a book which is the outcome of the white paper project, all of it. It's called How to Start a New Country, and it starts the day after the yes vote, and it goes 3 years, and it tells you absolutely everything we need to do, from recruiting new people, for recruiting key team, all the way through to one of the midway things we've got to do is adapt every vending machine in the country for the new coins. So it's everything that you need to do all the way through step by step. There's a couple of points where we come against this thing whereby I feel strongly about it, a lot of people do feel strongly about it, but there's not exact read between independence support and that thing. So remember, we probably got a majority of working class Rangers supporters probably voted yes. And I don't think there's any great need to provoke them. So my personal suggestion to this is what we do is we take a little bundle of these and we give them the choice to look at it. Now, it's going to take 3 years. And at the end of the 3 years, almost certainly we need a second referendum to ratify a constitution, because that's the ratification of a constitution by the people is assumed to be part of the process of constitution build. We're almost certainly going to have a ratification referendum anyway. There's 2 other things that I would probably put on that ticket as a kind of tidy up at the end, one of which is head of state, and the other of which is the fraught question of European Union membership. And my view is that since there's likely to be maybe 6 months to go before Independence Day, there's likely to be a second referendum which will be much, much less painfully contested, the focus of which is ratifying the referendum. I would put head of state and the EU. Now that means we can still go out and use our dog whistle to Republicans to make them understand that this is a thing. But we don't have to force the point during the Indie Ref, and the same with Europe. It's too complicated to believe that we can find a single position which nails this during the referendum. So I think we say EEA EFTA, and then we can choose to begin the process of rejoining the EU at the end of the process, and the same with the monarch. There may be 1 or 2 other issues that crop up where we say let's quarantine that and put it at the end of the process as well. So I think that's the best solution. But yeah, I can't wait. I can't wait for the end of the bloody BBC royal propaganda machine as well. These will be joys for me.
Okay, thank you, Rob. I just want to thank Kate, Natalie, and Robin for their presentations. So please join me and show your appreciation. I've just got one favour to ask of our presenters. We'd like you to draw the first 3 top prizes, if that's okay. We're going to bring the bucket out. The first prize is a bottle of whiskey signed by the First Minister. Second prize is, I think, a box of chocolate signed by her. And I can't remember what the third prize is. But anyway, Olive and Gordon, who's organised this, will fill you in on the details.
Okay. Not very elegant as we do this, but we've got about 20 odd prizes, so we'll start with the bottle of whiskey, which has been kindly signed by Nicola. So we'll start from this end. Would you like to pump in for this? And if there's no takers on this, we'll look and see if there's a name on the back.
White 377.
Oh, it's mine. No, it's not. I forgot my tickets. I've got my own. White 377. There's no name in the back. Well, there you are, madam.
Hooray, there we go. Bottle of whiskey.
My glasses. Oh. Am I drawing these?
The next prize will combine together. We've got a box of hand-finished chocolates. These are Parliament chocolates and cream toffees. So can I ask
Yes, I'm sorry, I got too excited. I've already done it. So it's white 285.
White 285. Well, now have a good look. Another look. I'm at 280 here. I don't have any fives. Okay, we'll pull another one then. Have a look in the back, see if there's someone's name in the back. Sometimes. No, okay.
This is the next one.
Am I redrawing this one first?
Yeah, just pull it out. Just drag it out. We've got a pink one.
Pink 2121.
21.
It is.
Hey, there we go.
Oh, so I get to do that one. Well, let me pick one. So have we done? Are we ready?
And the last one. No, the third prize here is this is by Jim McDonald. Campbell, I should say, she's one of our local actors in Edinburgh. Is she here?
Ah, it's lovely.
Yeah, right. And so we're going to
That's white 363.
White 363. Well done.
Well done.
Let's walk us through the rest of them now.
While Gordon and Olive's doing that, I'm just going to ask the three presenters if we can take pictures with our other co-convener. We'll stand here. So we can put it on the first book page. Yeah.
Where do you want us? I don't know. Okay, just they're going to stand here.
Oh. Back against the front?
What about we could put it here, right? Yeah.
Let's just get started. Okay. Hold up here.
I'm really glad you stepped in. It's great.
I'm going to have to go now as well.
Oh,
Thanks so much for having us. It was great.
Really good.
Thank you.
I'm really glad you spoke to the audience.
stand proud, our conscience clear. We did not yield to the project fear. The propaganda, their shameful lies, their mask has slipped, no more in disguise. For social justice, prosperity, to rid our country of the scourge of poverty. We are 45, we stand together, united we rise. We are the 45, the torch is lit and never shall it die. Come join the 45. An end to trident and illegal wars, the killing and dying for the rich man's cause. An end to Westminster elitist rule, Etonian ways of greed and ridicule. So come join us, all shoulders to the wheel. In strength and numbers, Scotland shall prevail. We are 45, we stand together, united we rise. We are 45, the torch is lit and never shall it die. Come join the 45. Till the rocks they melt in the sun, we shall press on until the day is won. Until the locks they run dry, we will not yield till the dream is realized. So come join us, all shoulders to the wheel. In strength and numbers, Scotland shall prevail. We are the 45, we stand together, united we rise. We are the 45, the torch is lit and never shall it die. Come join the 45. Come join the 45. Come join the 45. Come join the 45. Last night as I staggered home from drinking on the town, I sang a song of Scotland, the king who once was crowned. And then appeared before me the Bruce upon his steed, with the lion rampant, flag and shield of the country he once fled. He pulled me up behind him onto the horse's back, and we made our way to Holyrood, down the mile into the park. We stopped outside a Parliament of a northern British state, with token gesture powers, the scraps from a London plate. That's not why we fought, he said, it's not why Wallace bled. To bow and be subservient, lifeblood was not shed. Who fought and died for liberty, don't let it be in vain. Rise up, stand up off your knees, and be a nation once again. We galloped on through the mist and up into the clouds, to the towns and the cities where poverty abounds. Food banks for the working poor, disabled and the sick, an inconvenient truth for the elitists and the rich. To Argyll and Bute we made our way, to the peace camp of Faslane, for nuclear disarmament they protest and they campaign, while the misery of austerity forced by London rule. But £200 billion still found for Trident's renewal. That's not why we fought, he said, it's not why Wallace bled. To bow and be subservient, lifeblood was not shed. Who fought and died for liberty, don't let it be in vain. Rise up, stand up off your knees, and be a nation once again. And on to the Highlands, where tens of thousands died, forced into slavery, colonies far and wide. 250,000 souls cleared from ancestral homes in a land the aristocrat and the Arab sheikh now owns. We returned to the capital of this northern British state.
About what are the key points you think we ought to be doing? Just another minute then.
I could see in vain. Rise up, stand up off your knees and be a nation once again. Rise up, stand up off your knees. Be a nation once again. First I saw the hooded men on the burning crosses. I was a boy back then. The white supremacists, they terrorized me. They hung my father from a sycamore tree. So yes, I took to violence, lived by the sword. It was my way.
All right. Let's start with the group at the back. Would you like to share some of your thoughts with us?
Okay, doing a little test. Okay, folks, that's the live stream finishing. The event's just coming to an end here, so there's nothing really much more we can cover here. So I hope you really enjoyed today's event, Pensioners for Independence in Edinburgh. It's the first conference. And what else do we have coming up, Gavin? You know?
What else do we have coming up? My mind's gone blank.
His mind's went blank, so is mine. I think it's because we're very tired, isn't it?
Absolutely, it's not anything.
Yeah, so we had a really early start today. So if you check out our website, you'll find out what's going on. Okay, so if you can, maybe think about giving us a donation. You can find that link via our website. I think Gavin stuck up a link here. Okay, kill it. Okay, right, folks, we need to go.